It's a deep honor and privilege to welcome George Jacobs, an amazing, amazing human being, a great philanthropist, a futurist, and he has a multitude of personalities that he's all bringing together. But fundamentally, he's an amazing man who's out there helping to change the world. And today, we are very privileged to have him here in our office to talk about the way forward. George, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure to be here
Thanks
with you.
for having me.
Tell us about your early journey of life and how did you evolve yourself to where you are today?
I was born in the south of India, in Cochin, but grew up in Rajasthan in Northwest, and I went to university there, university. And when I graduated, I focused on museum planning and design. So I had specialized in science museums, history of science, technology, medicine, and started working with a private foundation to set up a science center in Jaipur and a planetarium. So that began my journey and interest in museums, which I've carried forward now for 34 years.
So how many museums have you created, curated, and developed?
So over the years, I've worked on over 108 museums, which is a fairly big number. Not all projects have involved the creation of an entirely new institution. Some are focused on functional planning, some are focused on interpretive planning, on curatorial resources, some are focused on procurement, some are focused on concept development and design, and some are focused on everything from A to Z. So from conceiving an institution to actually establishing an institution. So I've been fortunate to have established 4 institutions in my career. And the last one was working on the Philip J. Currie Dinosaur Museum in Canada.
Dubai has many iconic landmarks, as you know, but every single day as I passed the Museum of the Future, it fascinates me. Every time I see it from a different angle, sometimes during the night, sometimes in the day, and it is a different experience. You've seen it, of course, but you've been inside it and you've looked at it. What are your thoughts about it, and what do we need to do to develop that?
So I think it is timely that this amazing museum has been conceived in a dynamic city like Dubai, a country like Dubai. The building itself is a break from everything that is conventional. It is 5 stories tall. It has an eye or a void or a negative space in the middle, which positions us with this sense of the unknown, what is invisible. So you see the physical manifestation of this eye-shaped building, cocooned with calligraphy and with calligraphic statements that are inspirational, that are poetic, that are observational, that are reflective. And then you see this void, which gives you a sense of the unknown and gives you a sense of how our quest to explore the unexplored should continue.
What an amazing manifestation of thought. I sort of saw it more like a vortex and that circle, and you can basically almost like a time machine. In the early days we used to see it, and I can just about visualize things happening inside it. But what an amazing idea and reflection. And I believe everybody will have their own visions of that, and that is really part of what a place like that emanates from you.
Correct. I think what is invisible is far more powerful than what is visible and what one can create. Yeah. And I think the museum addresses that in so many different metaphoric ways.
You talk about the ocean, and I was fascinated when I first met you, where you said, healthy oceans, healthy humanity. Could you explain that a wee bit more for us normal people to understand?
So the oceans, are the lungs of humanity in a nutshell. And as my great hero, Dr. Sylvia Earle, always mentions, that if there is no blue, there's no green. So the oceans nurture this planet, and they occupy 70% of this planet. And we have, either through ignorance or through greed or because of other reasons, we have always treated it with great neglect. We have polluted it, We have pillaged and plundered its resources. And we have created a carbon waste or a plastic waste or a PCB waste or a microplastic waste to a proportion that is so enormous that now we are struggling to see how we can clean 30% of it by 2030. So 30 by 30, 2030 is the SDG's new goal. But that is such a small goal. Even if it is achieved, the tide of pollution will try to drown it the very next minute. So this constant appreciation for our heritage in terms of our natural resources is the key to our conscience. And if we allow that conscience to be polluted in so many different ways, then there is very little hope for us as a species.
What do we stop now? What do we do something that's immediate? What can we learn, and what can everybody accept that let's do it today? For example, no more plastics. Is that real? Can that happen?
Well, plastic is a miracle product. So, everything that we see and use in our day-to-day lives in one shape or form or the other comes as a petroleum byproduct. Whether it's nail polish or makeup or frame of our glasses, reading glasses, computer screens. I mean, there is a copious amount of plastic in our everyday life. Understanding that is, understanding part of the problem. But how do you translate that into the 3 Ps, the P3 that I call? One is a change in your personal habits. The second is focusing on programs and policies that can, put some regulations and restrictions on manufacturing, on supply chain, on carbon footprint, on sustainability, on carbon credits, on LEED compliant buildings. There is a long list of, how you mitigate drawdown. And lastly, focusing on innovations. There are different ways in which we can sequester plastic, carbon. There are different ways in which we can, check pollution. And there are certain innovations that are appearing in the marketplace, whether it's through electric vehicles or green shipping or other uses of minimizing fossil fuel usage and focusing more on exploring new methods of energizing this planet. All that is happening, but it is a slow sort of rise, and it has to, the momentum has to be kept on. So, changing your personal habits of consumption, articulating policies and programs that mitigate pollution and climate issues, and then lastly, focusing on projects that innovate and mitigate certain things that we thought impossible just a few decades ago.
Thank you for that. My thing, which I always challenge people who talk about things that are slow moving, is that we talk in terms of 10xing everything. We talked in terms of exponential growth. We talked in terms of exponential technologies. But when it comes to oceans, when it comes to climate, when it comes to social change or anything like that, we always just find ourselves we just slow ourselves down. What can we do to just completely shift our mind to sort of say, enough is enough, we need to think 10x, and not just innovate, but absolutely extrapolate it into an exponential cycle, create a level of urgency. Maybe in 2 weeks' time in the COP conference you can do that. But where do we create that energy that it becomes 10x'd? And not 20 years from now, but why not 5? Not 30%, why not 90%? I just don't get it, why we are accepting a lower number or a slower pace.
I think it's and this is just my personal observation, that it's a very complex issue in terms of implementation. Different countries have different political compulsions, economic compulsions, population issues, resource issues, and not everybody can be at the table with the same playing field. They can agree in principle to a basic common denominator, a minimum acceptance plan, if you will. And I think that is a good starting point. The pace of that minimum acceptance plan is, in the words of many, on the slower side. Most recently, you may have heard the observations by Greta Thunberg that addresses the need for urgency and a need to minimize talk and a need to accelerate action. I think the world needs more voices, especially from the younger generation, to drive home the point that time is not infinite.
Indeed, and that's a lovely segue into this amazing book, which is actually called Voices for a Better Future. SOS, Planet Earth. You very kindly presented this book to me, George. You are part of this, and it's an amazing array of international movie stars, philanthropists, business people, politicians, all sorts of people in there. What's the story behind that, and what can we do to give these voices more energy?
Indeed, this is a very wonderful, set of voices that talk about saving the planet and what each of these individuals is actually doing in terms of his or her role in making that happen in their small way. And the book also begins with the story of the hummingbird, which Wangari Maathai famously used to narrate about the ability of a tiny hummingbird to quell a forest fire. So, it has a number of hummingbirds in the narrative, and I was happy to be included in that mix. It has names such as Barack and Michelle Obama, among others, who've all dedicated some time and effort in their lives to focus on climate change, to focus on conservation, to focus on issues that can save our planet, either with money or through programs and so on.
How much is this just fashionable for a lot of these people? Because a lot of people are there from Hollywood, and how much is it generally authentic? That we've got obviously names like Jeremy Irons, Elon Musk, George Jacob, you, Brad Pitt, Robert Redford, Greta Thunberg, Harrison Ford, Al Gore. It's a who's who, pretty much so. Now, the collective intelligence and the collective influence and power of these people, this cannot change stuff. What can?
So one of the things that I observed in this collection of names is I'm perhaps the only one who is focused on the creation of a physical space or a living museum focused on ocean conservation and climate change. So when I embarked on that journey and unveiled the vision, we had Dr. Jill Biden, who's now the First Lady of the United States, come and deliver the keynote address. What that meant for us and our team was that there was a true desire to endorse and support a project of this magnitude. So this is a $260 million environmental edifice that we are setting up in San Francisco, converting a 25-year-old aquarium into an ocean conservation and living museum. On the heels of that effort, we were invited to do similar projects in leadership roles in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, and Bergen in Norway. And that leads to the possibility of scaling such an effort globally by creation of a web of physical centers that provide the premise for citizen science to stay connected virtually as well, and increase the footprint of awareness to billions of users.
So the synthesis of our future is exactly what George is talking about. George, this is one of yours. Share what this is and explain how this whole thing comes together.
This is it's sort of a symbolic graphic that focuses on what we're planning in San Francisco. And the project is called Bay Equatorium. It is an organic form that focuses on a living aquarium at its core, and it has immersive and engaging exhibits on climate change on the periphery. There is a secondary bubble that is attached to it, which focuses on ocean-based living programs, including Deep Ocean Exploration Launch and Learn Center. And then there is a third bubble, which is an artificial intelligence bubble, that provides this virtual connectivity between sister cities across the world that San Francisco currently has agreements with.
I talk a lot about jobs of the future. Your job seems fascinating, and it seems that it will really defy gravity and be there in 50 years' time. How do you inspire young people? What do we need to say to them to become experts like you in the sort of kind of spaces that you're working in?
I think remembering to appreciate what we take for granted is, I think, the first step in appreciating a center like this and adopting its mission in your life. For that reason, we took a different approach of focusing on telling the story of climate change, not using statistics and data, but more so with the evocative story of the Native Americans who lived in the Bay Area. So the Ohlone, the Miwok, the Chumash, the Yokuts, the Chechonia Indians, and their environmental indigenous stewardship becomes the underlying narrative for the center. And the building is inspired by fish scales and Ohlone shell mounds.
We've been talking about the future, so why don't we put ourselves in a space capsule, in a time machine, and take us deep into the future. And let's say we are celebrating your 100th birthday. What has George achieved, and what is happening around George in 50 years' time?
Well, if I'm still alive, I'm probably half bionic, and maybe I have a chip ingrained in my head. But the possibilities of exponential change, you mentioned about 10x, has been occurring in pretty much every discipline that we can think of. There was a time when it took several rooms for an IBM 1130 mainframe to accommodate its hardware. And now a simple cell phone in your hands has more computing power. So that's an exponential shift. The ability and the speed with which information is coming to our fingertips has undergone a phenomenal shift. And with every decade, you would see breakthroughs that are nothing short of mind-boggling. So in 100 years, I think we would see many, many changes in mobility, in connectivity, in transportation, in machine learning, in the ability of intuitive systems to integrate. The possibilities are endless.
I was going down a different track, and perhaps I'll reframe the question. Will the oceans be clean? Because George has been busy cleaning the oceans. Will the air be lovely to breathe for our children and our grandchildren? Will we be living in an environment where there's enough awareness and knowledge of all of the natural blessings that we have had? And what do we need to do over the next 2, 3, 4 decades to enable us to actually have that beautiful environment that when we look out, we see greenery, we see green, we see blue, and we see clean air?
I truly believe that we will see that day sooner than one thinks. One only has to look back just a few decades ago when smoking was a norm pretty much everywhere. You saw that on movies, you saw that in billboards, and while it still exists, but it's pretty much vanished from our public lives. Most restaurants ban it, most institutions don't allow it, while some people go outside the building and do that. But you've seen a massive reduction in that supply chain, that attitudinal shift, and a complete change in your personal habits. And I think a revolution of that proportion and magnitude to conserve our oceans, our environment, whether it's greening of the deserts or whether it's quelling of forest fires and preventing our dense forests from becoming deserts. I think both sides of the equation are going to play into this compendium.
One of the early visuals that we had, a vision into the future perhaps of a clean environment, was in the early days of COVID, when everything just cleared up and the dolphins came into Venice, and for the first time people in Delhi and Beijing saw the sky, the blue sky. I actually at that time thought that perhaps COVID will help us with that mind shift. Has it?
I think there was a realization that several billion metric tons of carbon saw a significant dip globally during COVID, whether it's 14 months or 16 months or 18 months of shutdown. People have not populated highways with cars as they used to, and that has created a big shift in cleaner skies. Whether or not that's sustainable in the long haul will depend on our work habits and our lessons that we've learned from COVID. But I don't think humanity needs another COVID to teach them a second lesson. We can't afford it.
We are in the Middle East and you're gracing us with your presence here. Let's take a few countries in the Middle East, one at a time. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is building its future city, NEOM. And the future of water in that future city is one of the key things that they're looking at. What would be your advice to them to be looking at, and the questions that they should be asking expert like yourself to be able to fulfill their authentic direction?
So water is that liquid nectar that we need for survival at pretty much every level. There is no life without water. In every form, water nurtures this planet, whether it's gaseous, or whether it's liquid, or whether it's frozen. So for NEOM to take it up as their core conversational, existential premise is absolutely vital for humanity in so many different ways. It is that liquid form of life that assumes the form of the vessel that you put it in, whether it's inside our bodies. 70% of our body is water. Whether it's the beer that we like to drink, it all comes from water. So conserving that true gold, this transparent gold, is conserving ourselves as species.
There's a lot of desalination. I think our region, particularly Saudi Arabia, is the number one country in the world in terms of desalination of water from the oceans. Is that good? And should we do more of that? Or should we look at different ways of looking for water to irrigate our deserts here?
As the population grows, I think the demand for water also will grow, and water wars will take a different shape or form, whether it's overt or covert. Battles have been fought because of drinking water issues. You see that in the animal world, where they come to the watering hole, and you see that as the resources become scarce, the conflict rises. Desalination of water is one solution that humans have adapted in many countries, in many parts of the world successfully, and they have no other alternate. But in countries where they have a possibility of looking for more natural solutions, that's where we should encourage ecosystems to breathe naturally, to accommodate precipitation so that there's fresh water always available, and to conserve potable water, to conserve water that we consume for other needs, including construction. Those are, I think, very important investments that one has to look at from a long-term perspective of scenario building. So many of these interactive museums have addressed water issues in so many different ways, but I think understanding how these resources can actually shape our lives and annihilate our lives is the key.
One of the scary, shocking statistics that I have seen, and I mentioned in many of my presentations, is that if we stay on the same trajectory as we are now in terms of not controlling carbonization and so on, that climate change will end up raising the level of water of the oceans by anywhere up to about 18 to 20 inches by 2050, 2055. What that does is displace over 1 billion people from all of the cities that are next to the coastlines at the moment. In that scenario, which most people say it's a very realistic scenario on the current trajectory, unless we turn it around, 1 billion refugees walking around, 1 billion displaced people walking around, that changes geography, that changes the whole dynamic of the way we live in the world. Is that kind of urgency ever addressed at COP and other places, that this is almost imminent, and if we don't do something about it, this is going to happen, and little refugee crisis from Syria and so on will look like a picnic?
No, you're right. I think sea level rise is an issue that has been raised several times at different UN platforms, including COP. And there was an interesting and forceful address by the former president of Kiribati, President Tong, Anote Tong, that talked about why it is important to keep our eyes very closely tuned to the 1.5 degrees Celsius cap. Staying under that number is vital, at least for the survival of his island. So Kiribati is a tiny island, and a sea level rise of that minuscule magnitude will drown that island. And what he calls will create the first set of climate refugees. And as you rightly pointed out, that this would look at war-torn, mobility of people or migration of people through a different lens, because the calamity would be of such a magnitude that it would displace a very large number of people. Many years ago, in 1950s, there was a book that was authored by Sir Fred Hoyle called The Black Cloud. And back in the 50s, when that book came out, it painted multiple scenarios on global warming, greenhouse gas emissions, the rising temperatures of the planet, and the entrapment of heat. So the first set of scenarios focused on freezing of the poles and how the planet would cool. And that created its own challenges. And the second scenario was about the heat that the planet had trapped that was unable to escape because of a hydrogen cloud, and what that heat did to the melting poles and rising sea levels. So those are scenarios I think we should actively think about, because if we are not careful, that day won't be far.
We've been talking about a lot of doom and gloom and a lot of difficulties and challenges and so on. As we get towards the end of this conversation, I'd love to chat to you about the wonderful things that you see in front of you. What are the happy things that we have in front of us? You have these stunningly beautiful museums that you create, the amazing experiences that you build for young people and all people to be able to see, to understand our history, our life, our science, our technology. What are the happy moments that we should be looking at, and what are the wonderful things that are there in front of us?
I think, walking through our Smithsonian affiliated aquarium in San Francisco, one of the most beautiful things I see pretty much on a daily basis is, yes, there is beautiful biodiversity that we have in our tanks. So we hold 1 million gallons in our saltwater tanks and about 24,000 animals. So just the sheer biodiversity of what exists in the San Francisco Bay is beautiful. But what makes it even more special for me is to see little babies in their mother's arms who are fascinated by the biodiversity that they see, in these curved tunnels. And I'm yet to see a child cry in the tunnels. And that to me shows that the ocean is calming. The ocean is beautiful, it's wondrous, it's calming. And it is also nurturing life. And the interdependence of all these species and the interdependence of us as human beings on our oceans is very symbiotic. Hence the title, Ecosynthesis, Our Future.
You're in the UAE at the moment. If you had a magic wand and you were able to do anything, what would you create in this place? What do you think this place would really blossom if they had it in Dubai or Abu Dhabi? In addition to whatever wonderful things that they're doing, what can you contribute to them in terms of creation of something?
I think the greening of the UAE is nothing short of magical. The greening of UAE the ability to harness frugal natural resources, especially water, is just commendable. The world lives in Dubai. The world lives in the UAE. You see that in your work environment. You see that on the streets. You see that at the World Expo. The world is here. And they are united behind a common cause, which is making the world a better place. The awareness is an area where one could learn from museums, one could learn from expositions, one could learn from conferences and conversations. But in terms of creation of an environmental edifice, it would, where I see a gap and an opportunity, is something that is focused on this ecosynthesis as a concept. Yes, we have the Louvre, yes, we have the Guggenheim, yes, we have other cultural institutions, but I think we need an institution that connects these dots, whether the right side meets the left side, or whether they inspire us collectively to look to the future.
So this is the ecosynthesis that you talk about. Okay. Any final advice you'd like to give to our young people, something that would inspire them and make them more connected with the wonderful messages that you have?
The message for the younger generation would be to harness the talent that we have within, to be inclusive, to be nurturing to ideas, to always remember that alone we are a drop, but together we are an ocean.
We've just been talking to George Jacob, the great George Jacob, who has really put together an amazing array, a plethora of ideas and imagination. For me personally, it's just been a really rewarding experience and just blown my brain and my thoughts and my imagination into something really special. Things that we don't talk about, things that we sort of know but we don't engage with. And he sort of has peeled the onion, certainly for me, and I hope for you, in terms of some things that are really, truly, deeply important for us as far as our futures are concerned, and especially our children's futures. So with that, I thank all of you, and I hope we'll have lots and lots of things to discuss in the future. Thank you very much. Cheers.